Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that every roll of toilet paper on Earth has vanished. Not just from your bathroom, not just from your local store, but from every supermarket, warehouse, and factory across the world. No toilet paper, no tissues, no wet wipes, nothing. What would you do? It sounds like a strange question, but for most of human history, people never had toilet paper at all. In fact, the soft white rolls we take for granted today are one of the newest inventions in the long story of human hygiene. For thousands of years, people still faced the same problem we do today. They still needed a way to clean themselves, yet they somehow managed without supermarket shelves filled with dozens of brands promising softness, comfort, and luxury. The solutions they came up with were often ingenious, sometimes uncomfortable, occasionally shocking. Ancient Greeks used stones. Romans shared a sponge attached to a stick. Medieval Europeans relied on straw, hay, and scraps of cloth. In colder regions, snow became a tool of necessity. Later along coastlines, seashells sometimes served a purpose few people would imagine today. And centuries before toilet paper became common in Europe, Imperial China had already begun producing paper specifically for personal hygiene. The story of toilet paper is not really about paper at all. It is a story about survival. It is a story about innovation. And perhaps most importantly, it is a story about how ordinary people lived their daily lives throughout history. Because while kings fought wars and empires rose and fell, everyone still had to visit the bathroom, and everyone had to solve the same problem. To understand how humanity arrived at the modern toilet paper roll, we need to travel back to a time long before cities, kingdoms, and civilizations. We need to return to the world of the first humans. Long before written history, our ancestors lived as hunter-gatherers. Their lives were deeply connected to the natural world. Everything they needed came from the environment around them. Food came from hunting and gathering. Shelter came from natural materials. And when nature called, the solution was usually whatever happened to be nearby. In forested regions, large leaves became one of humanity's earliest sanitation tools. Soft leaves were abundant, disposable, and easy to find. But not every leaf was a good choice. Some plants caused irritation. Others could leave painful rashes that lasted for days. Learning which plants were safe was valuable knowledge passed down through generations. In colder regions, moss became a surprisingly effective alternative. Soft, absorbent, and widely available, moss served many northern communities for centuries. Archaeological evidence suggests that people continued using moss long after more advanced civilizations had emerged elsewhere. Grass was another common option. Dry bundles could be gathered quickly and discarded afterward. In harsher environments, people adapted even further. Tree bark, wood shavings, and plant fibers all found their place in the long history of human hygiene. None of these methods were particularly comfortable by modern standards. But comfort was not the goal. Survival was. For early humans, life was already challenging enough. They were far more concerned with finding food, avoiding predators, and surviving harsh weather than creating luxurious bathroom experiences. Yet these simple solutions worked. For thousands upon thousands of years, humanity managed perfectly well without toilet paper. But as civilizations began to rise, people started developing more specialized methods. And some of those methods would become far stranger than anything nature had provided. As societies became more organized, sanitation slowly evolved alongside them. Villages grew into towns. Towns became cities. And with larger populations came new challenges. People could no longer simply disappear into the wilderness whenever nature called. Daily life was changing. Human civilization was becoming more complex. And nowhere was this more apparent than in the ancient world. Around 2,500 years ago, the people of ancient Greece were building temples, creating philosophy, and laying the foundations of Western civilization. Yet even the greatest thinkers of the age still faced the same basic human needs as everyone else. And their solution to one of those needs may sound surprising today. Stones. Historians have discovered evidence that many Greeks used small, rounded pebbles known as pessoi. These stones were chosen carefully. Smooth surfaces helped reduce discomfort. Sharp edges were avoided whenever possible. Even so, the idea seems difficult for modern people to imagine. We live in a world where toilet paper is designed to be softer than ever before. Entire companies compete to create the most comfortable products imaginable. Yet for the ancient Greeks, a handful of carefully selected stones was perfectly normal. In some cases, broken pieces of pottery were also used. These fragments, known as ostraca, were common throughout Greek society. Pottery was everywhere. When it broke, the fragments often found new purposes. Sometimes those purposes were practical, sometimes they were political, and occasionally they became part of everyday sanitation. It is one of those small details that rarely appears in history books, yet it reveals something important. Human beings have always adapted to the resources available around them. What feels strange to one generation may feel completely normal to another. But if Greek sanitation seems unusual, the Romans would take things in an entirely different direction. The Roman Empire became famous for its roads, aqueducts, military power, and monumental architecture. Roman engineers transformed the ancient world. They built systems that connected vast territories across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. They transported water across enormous distances. They constructed bathhouses capable of serving thousands of people. And they developed some of the most advanced sanitation systems the ancient world had ever seen. Public toilets became a common feature of Roman cities. Unlike modern restrooms, these spaces offered very little privacy. Front rows of stone seats lined the walls. Beneath them, water continuously flowed through channels designed to carry waste away. Citizens sat shoulder to shoulder. Conversations happened freely. Business deals were discussed. Political debates unfolded. Friends met and talked. For Romans, the public toilet was often a social space. To modern audiences, that may seem almost unbelievable. Yet the most surprising part wasn't the lack of privacy. It was what happened afterward. Instead of toilet paper, many Romans relied on an object known as a tersorium. At first glance, it seemed simple enough. A natural sea sponge attached to the end of a wooden stick. After use, the sponge would be rinsed in water. Sometimes vinegar was added to improve cleanliness. Then the sponge was placed back in its holder, ready for the next person. And that is where modern readers usually pause. Because yes, February the sponge was shared. The same sponge might be used by dozens of different people throughout the day. By today's standards, the practice sounds deeply unhygienic. Modern medicine has taught us a great deal about bacteria and disease transmission. But the Romans did not possess that knowledge. They judged cleanliness differently. What mattered was whether the system appeared to work, and for centuries, it did. The tersorium remained a common tool throughout much of the Roman world. It became one of the most recognizable sanitation devices in history. Yet despite Rome's impressive engineering, their methods were only one chapter in a much larger global story. Across the world, different cultures were developing entirely different solutions. Some relied on water, others turned to materials provided by nature, and a few methods were so unexpected that they continue to fascinate historians today. Because when it came to solving everyday problems, human creativity knew almost no limits. Across the ancient world, people solved the same problem in remarkably different ways. Geography often determined the solution. What worked in a snowy Arctic settlement would be useless in a tropical rainforest. What was common along a coastline might be impossible to find in a desert. Human hygiene evolved differently wherever people lived. Along certain coastal regions, seashells occasionally became part of daily sanitation practices. Historians still debate exactly how widespread this method was. Evidence is limited. But references from various historical sources suggest that shells were sometimes used when other materials were scarce. Whether common or rare, the idea serves as a reminder of how resourceful people could be. In parts of the Americas, another unusual solution emerged. Corn was one of the most important crops in many indigenous societies. After harvest season, dried corn cobs remained plentiful. Rather than throwing them away, people found practical uses for them. One of those uses involved personal hygiene. It may sound uncomfortable to modern ears, yet for generations, it served its purpose. In the far north, where vegetation was limited and winters dominated much of the year, snow became a surprisingly practical tool. Cold, clean, and readily available, snow offered a solution when few alternatives existed. Elsewhere, animal fur, wool, coconut fibers, and countless other materials found their place in human history. There was no universal method. Every culture adapted to its environment. Every society developed its own traditions. Yet among all these different approaches, one civilization would eventually create a solution that changed history forever. That civilization was China. To understand why, we first need to understand the invention that made everything possible: paper. Today, paper seems ordinary. We write on it, print on it, wrap products with it, use it every day without a second thought. Both when paper first appeared, it was revolutionary. Before paper, information was recorded on bamboo strips, silk, wood, stone, and animal skins. Many of these materials were expensive, heavy, or difficult to produce. Paper changed everything. It made knowledge easier to store, easier to transport, easier to share. Over time, it helped transform entire civilizations. Somewhere along the way, people discovered another use for it: personal hygiene. One of the earliest references appears during the 6th century. A Chinese scholar reportedly wrote that he would never use paper containing sacred texts for toilet purposes. At first glance, the statement seems insignificant, but historians see it differently. Hidden within that sentence is an important clue. If people were discussing which paper should or should not be used, then paper was already being used for sanitation. The practice had already become common enough to spark debate. As centuries passed, the idea continued to spread. China's papermaking industry expanded dramatically. Production methods improved. Costs gradually decreased. More people gained access to paper products. Then something extraordinary happened. Toilet paper began to be manufactured specifically for use in the imperial court. Historical records from the 14th century describe the production of millions of sheets annually. Millions. At a time when much of the world still relied on leaves, straw, and cloth scraps. The imperial household enjoyed specially produced paper designed for comfort. Servants prepared and delivered enormous quantities to the royal family. The emperor and his court possessed a luxury almost unknown elsewhere on Earth. Imagine a medieval traveler somehow transported from Europe to Imperial China. They would find magnificent cities, advanced technologies, sophisticated systems of government, and perhaps most surprisingly of all, dedicated toilet paper. It was a small innovation, yet it represented a major shift in the history of hygiene. For the first time, paper was no longer simply a tool for writing. It had become a product specifically designed to improve everyday life. But despite its success in China, toilet paper would not conquer the world overnight. Thousands of miles away, Europe was entering a very different chapter of history. A chapter where sanitation remained a daily struggle. A chapter where comfort was often a luxury. And a chapter where most people still relied on methods that had changed very little for centuries. To understand why toilet paper took so long to spread, we need to step into the crowded streets of medieval Europe. Medieval Europe is often remembered as a world of castles, knights, and grand cathedrals. But for ordinary people, daily life was far less romantic. Most families lived in small homes with limited sanitation. Running water was rare, sewage systems were primitive, and personal hygiene depended heavily on social status, geography, and local customs. For the average person, toilet paper simply did not exist. Instead, people relied on whatever materials were readily available. Straw was common. Hay was common. Leaves remained popular in rural areas. Pieces of old cloth were reused whenever possible. Nothing was wasted. Every resource had value. Even items that had reached the end of their original purpose often found a second life. Wealthier households enjoyed certain advantages. Soft linen cloths could provide a more comfortable experience. Servants often handled unpleasant sanitation tasks. But even among the nobility, modern standards of bathroom comfort remained centuries away. The difference between rich and poor was significant, yet both groups still lived in a world without toilet paper. Conditions inside medieval cities could be particularly challenging. Streets were crowded. Houses were built close together. Waste disposal systems struggled to keep pace with growing populations. Chamber pots became a common feature of daily life. These containers allowed people to relieve themselves indoors, especially during cold nights. In the morning, the contents needed to be emptied. Sometimes they were dumped into designated pits, sometimes into rivers, sometimes into open drains running alongside city streets. The result was an environment that modern visitors would likely find overwhelming. Unpleasant odors lingered in the air. Waste accumulated quickly. Disease spread more easily than it does today. Yet for the people who lived there, this was simply normal life. Most had never known anything different. It's easy to judge the past through the lens of the present. But medieval people were doing the best they could with the knowledge and resources available to them. They adapted, just as every generation before them had adapted. Still, change was coming. Not through sanitation, not through medicine, but through information. In the 15th century, a German inventor named Johannes Gutenberg introduced a machine that would transform the world: the printing press. Few people could have imagined how influential this invention would become. Books became cheaper. Ideas spread faster. Literacy gradually increased. Knowledge became more accessible than ever before. But the printing press would also have an unexpected impact on bathroom history. As paper became increasingly available, people began finding new uses for old printed materials. Newspapers became especially useful. After reading the latest news, many households discovered that the paper still had value. Instead of throwing it away, they saved it. Over time, newspapers became one of the most common sanitation materials in Europe and North America. Outhouses often contained stacks of old papers ready for use. In some rural communities, newspapers were hung from hooks or nails on wooden walls. Generations grew up treating yesterday's headlines as today's bathroom supplies. It wasn't luxurious, but it was practical. More importantly, it represented a major shift. For the first time, large numbers of people were regularly using paper for personal hygiene. The transition toward modern toilet paper had begun. Yet dedicated toilet paper products still did not exist. That would change in the 19th century. The man responsible was an American entrepreneur named Joseph Gaiety. In 1857, Gaiety introduced something revolutionary, a product designed specifically for bathroom use. He called it Gaiety's medicated paper. Unlike newspapers, magazines, or scraps of paper, this product had a single purpose: personal hygiene. Each sheet carried Gaiety's name printed directly onto the paper. He proudly advertised it as a healthier and more refined alternative to existing methods. The idea was ahead of its time. Many people found it unnecessary. Others felt uncomfortable discussing such products openly. Victorian society often treated bodily functions as private topics best left unmentioned. Veterans, despite the skepticism, the idea slowly gained support. More companies entered the market. Competition increased. Innovation accelerated. What began as a curious experiment was about to become an industry. And within a few decades, toilet paper would evolve from a niche product into one of the most common household items on Earth. The success of Joseph Gaiety's invention proved that people were willing to pay for convenience. But the toilet paper industry was still in its infancy. The product remained relatively expensive. Distribution was limited. and many consumers continued relying on newspapers or other alternatives. Veterans came one of the most important innovations in bathroom history, the toilet paper roll. Today it seems so obvious that it's easy to forget someone had to invent it. Before rolls became common, toilet paper was often sold as flat sheets. Functional, yes. Convenient, not always. The introduction of perforated rolls changed everything. For the first time, users could easily tear off exactly the amount they needed. The design was simple, elegant, and incredibly effective. Manufacturers quickly recognized its potential. Production increased, costs gradually fell. More households began making toilet paper a regular purchase. Around the same time, another transformation was taking place. Veterans' plumbing was spreading throughout cities and towns. Indoor bathrooms became increasingly common. Flush toilets replaced older systems. Standards of hygiene continued improving. Toilet paper fit perfectly into this new world. It was clean, convenient, disposable, and unlike many older sanitation methods, it required very little effort. By the early 20th century, toilet paper had become a staple of everyday life across much of the industrialized world. Companies competed aggressively for customers. Advertisements promised greater comfort, greater softness, greater cleanliness. Entire marketing campaigns were built around making toilet paper seem more luxurious. Looking back, some of those advertisements seem amusing, yet they reflected a deeper truth. Human beings are constantly seeking ways to make life more comfortable. Even the smallest improvements matter, especially when they affect something we do every single day. As manufacturing technology advanced, toilet paper evolved alongside it. Single-ply products became double-ply. Double-ply became ultra-soft. Embossed textures appeared. Premium brands emerged. Some companies even experimented with colored toilet paper: pink, blue, green, yellow. For a brief period, matching toilet paper to bathroom decor became surprisingly fashionable. It may sound absurd now, but it illustrates just how deeply toilet paper had become woven into everyday life. What began as a practical solution had evolved into a global consumer product. Entire fortunes were built around it. Massive factories operated day and night. Enormous machines transformed raw materials into endless rolls of paper. Warehouses filled with products destined for stores around the world. Millions of people worked throughout the supply chain, all to provide something that previous generations had lived without for thousands of years. And perhaps that is what makes the story so fascinating. Toilet paper feels timeless, yet it is anything but. In the grand timeline of human history, it arrived only yesterday. Most people who have ever lived never used it. Most civilizations that have ever existed functioned perfectly well without it. Yet once toilet paper became common, people adapted to it almost immediately. Within a relatively short period of time, it transformed from a luxury into a necessity. Few events illustrate this better than modern shortages. Whenever uncertainty enters society, toilet paper often becomes one of the first products people rush to buy. Economists have studied the phenomenon. Psychologists have studied it. Yet the underlying reason remains surprisingly simple. People associate toilet paper with normal life. It represents stability, predictability, comfort. When store shelves are full, everything feels ordinary. When shelves become empty, people begin to worry. During periods of crisis, images of empty toilet paper aisles have appeared repeatedly around the world. Customers filled shopping carts. Stores struggled to keep up with demand. News outlets reported shortages. Social media filled with photographs of bare shelves. To future historians, these moments may seem strange. After all, they involve an object that hardly anyone discussed for most of human history. Yet they reveal something important about human nature. We often notice everyday conveniences only when they disappear. The same is true for electricity, running water, internet access, and toilet paper. We rarely think about them until they're gone. Which brings us back to the question we asked at the very beginning. What would you do if toilet paper disappeared tomorrow? The answer, surprisingly, is the same thing humanity has always done: adapt. Our ancestors adapted with leaves, with moss, with straw, with stones, with cloth, with seashells, with cobs, with snow, with sponge sticks in Roman public toilets. Every generation found a solution. Every society found a way forward. And perhaps that is the real story hidden behind the history of toilet paper. Not the story of paper itself, but the story of human ingenuity. The story of ordinary people solving ordinary problems. Problems so universal that they connect every civilization that has ever existed. Ancient hunters gathering leaves in the forest. Greek philosophers walking through marble cities. Roman merchants visiting public latrines. Chinese craftsmen producing paper for imperial courts. Medieval peasants navigating muddy streets. Factory workers fueling the Industrial Revolution. And us. All separated by centuries, yet all connected by the same basic human experience. History is often told through wars, kings, and empires. But sometimes the most fascinating stories are hidden in the objects we overlook every day. A simple roll of toilet paper may seem ordinary, yet behind it lies a journey stretching across thousands of years. A journey of innovation, adaptation, creativity, and survival. The next time you reach for a roll of toilet paper, take a moment to appreciate it. Because compared to a handful of stones in ancient Greece, a shared sponge in Rome, or a bundle of straw in medieval Europe, that soft white roll in your bathroom is nothing short of a modern miracle. And like so many everyday objects, its story is far stranger than most people ever imagine. The history of toilet paper is ultimately the history of humanity itself. Quaint, unnoticed, yet surprisingly extraordinary. Before we end, it's worth remembering how unusual this story really is. Most inventions that changed history are easy to recognize. The wheel, the steam engine, electricity, the internet. Their impact is obvious. They transformed economies, industries, and entire civilizations. Toilet paper seems different, smaller, less important, almost insignificant. Yet history is not built solely by grand inventions. It is also shaped by countless small improvements that make everyday life a little easier. A safer way to store food, a more comfortable bed, a cleaner source of water, a better way to stay warm during winter, and yes, a better way to stay clean. For thousands of years, people simply accepted discomfort as part of life. They adapted because they had no alternative. But whenever a new solution appeared, no matter how small, it gradually improved the human experience. Toilet paper was one of those solutions. It did not conquer nations. It did not win wars. It did not build empires. Yet it quietly improved daily life for billions of people. That is what makes its story so fascinating. It reminds us that history is not only the story of kings and conquerors, it is also the story of ordinary people. People waking up each morning, going to work, raising families, solving everyday problems, and searching for ways to make life a little better than it was yesterday. Perhaps that is why the history of toilet paper feels surprisingly human. Because beneath all the strange methods, unusual inventions, and unexpected discoveries lies a simple truth. Every generation inherits the solutions of the generations before it, then adds something new, something better, and passes it forward. From leaves and moss, to stones and sponges, to paper and modern sanitation, humanity has always been moving in the same direction, toward greater comfort, greater cleanliness, and a better quality of life. The next time you see a simple roll of toilet paper sitting quietly in your bathroom, remember that it represents thousands of years of human ingenuity. A small object with an extraordinarily long story. And like many of history's greatest stories, it began with a simple problem that every human being has shared since the dawn of civilization.